June 4th, 1942, the moment when 5 minutes changed the history. At 10:24 a.m., 150 miles northwest of Midway, Lieutenant Commander Wade McClusky peered down from 14,000 feet and saw what intelligence had said should have been impossible. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers below, sailing in perfect diamond formation. The decks were alive with motion, mechanics refueling planes, crews arming bombers, fuel lines coiled across sun-bleached planks. The carriers were at their most vulnerable, fully armed, fully fueled, completely exposed. For 2 hours, McClusky had searched an empty ocean. His fuel was nearly gone. 32 dive bombers followed him toward what looked like failure. The Japanese fleet wasn't where it was supposed to be. Torpedo Squadron 8 had already been annihilated, 15 planes down, 1 man surviving. The American attack seemed to be collapsing, but half an hour earlier, McClusky had made a decision that would change the course of the Pacific War. Instead of turning back, he had followed the wake of a lone Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, racing to rejoin the main fleet after depth-charging the submarine Nautilus. That instinct brought him here, above the most powerful naval force in the world, moments before it was destroyed. The Japanese had no idea the Americans were overhead. Their radar was non-existent, and their Zero fighters were all down at sea level, finishing off the last torpedo bombers. The sky above the carriers was unguarded. At 10:24 a.m., McClusky rolled his SBD Dauntless into a 70-degree dive. 31 bombers followed. Below, Japanese lookouts screamed too late. In the next 5 minutes, the fate of the Pacific would be decided. To understand why, you have to understand what Japan believed about itself in early 1942. For 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Empire had seemed unstoppable, conquering territory larger than Europe, taking Hong Kong in 18 days, Singapore in 70, and the Philippines in 26. Their navy had driven Britain from the Indian Ocean, sunk the carrier Hermes and 2 cruisers, and humiliated every Western power it faced. Their carrier strike force, the Kido Butai, had never been defeated. Led by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the Japanese believed in Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan. They saw themselves as superior warriors, better trained, more disciplined, and more willing to die for their emperor. The plan for Midway was meant to lure the last American carriers into a trap and destroy them in a single decisive battle. Yamamoto's fleet was enormous, over 200 ships, including 4 of Japan's finest carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Together, they carried about 270 aircraft and the most experienced naval aviators in the world. The Americans had only 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the damaged Yorktown, patched together in just 3 days. Yet they held one advantage the Japanese didn't know existed. Codebreakers at Station Haipo in Pearl Harbor, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had cracked Japan's naval code. They knew AF, the target, was Midway, and Admiral Chester Nimitz positioned his carriers northeast of the atoll, waiting. The morning of June 4th began badly for the Americans. Marine fighters from Midway were slaughtered. Army B-17s missed their targets. Torpedo bombers attacked separately, uncoordinated, and without escort. Squadron 8 from Hornet was wiped out. 15 planes destroyed, no hits scored. From the bridge of Akagi, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida watched and admired their courage, but dismissed the attacks as futile. He didn't realize those futile assaults had drawn every Japanese fighter down to sea level. No one was watching the sky above. At 10:20 a.m., Admiral Chuichi Nagumo aboard Akagi gave the order to launch a counterstrike. 87 planes sat on the decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, engines warming, loaded with bombs and torpedoes. They were minutes from launching an attack that might have destroyed the American carriers. Then at 10:24, McClusky's dive bombers appeared. He gave the order, "Attack!" and dropped into a screaming dive. Bombs fell for just a few seconds, seconds that decided the war. The first struck Kaga, igniting aviation fuel and torpedoes. Within a minute, the ship was a firestorm. Lieutenant Richard Best, leading a section of bombers, saw most planes hitting Kaga and redirected his group toward Akagi. His bomb struck near the midship, detonating torpedoes and igniting the hangar deck. Over Soryu, 3 bombs from Yorktown's group hit almost simultaneously. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning. By noon, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were doomed, 240 aircraft destroyed, 700 airmen dead. Japan had lost 2/3 of its carrier strength in minutes. The loss was catastrophic. The pilots and deck crews represented years of training, irreplaceable experience forged since the war in China. Timing had made all the difference. 10 minutes earlier, their planes would have been below deck. 10 minutes later, they'd have been airborne. But at 10:24, the flight decks were packed with fueled, armed aircraft, floating powder kegs. Admiral Nagumo abandoned Akagi as flames engulfed her. Captain Okada of Kaga died on his bridge. Captain Yanagimoto of Soryu refused to leave his ship and went down with her. Only Hiryu, several miles north, escaped the first assault. Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, commanding from Hiryu, launched counterattacks. His dive bombers hit Yorktown at 1:30 p.m., crippling her, and a second strike finished her off. But at 5 p.m., American dive bombers found Hiryu and struck her with 4 bombs. By nightfall, she too was burning out of control. Yamaguchi and his captain chose to die aboard their ship. By dawn on June 5th, all 4 Japanese carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were gone. In one day, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, around 250 aircraft, and over 3,000 men. The elite of Japanese naval aviation was wiped out. The United States lost 1 carrier, Yorktown, and 307 men. The imbalance was fatal. America could replace its losses. Japan could not. Within a year, the U.S. would commission 12 new fleet carriers and 9 light carriers. Japan would never recover. Admiral Yamamoto, commanding from the battleship Yamato hundreds of miles away, was devastated. At 2:55 a.m. on June 5th, he ordered a retreat. The invasion of Midway was cancelled. Japan's dream of expansion died in those 5 minutes of destruction. From that day forward, Japan was on the defensive. 2 months later, U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal. Japan's surviving carriers fought on, but their losses in trained pilots were irreplaceable. By 1944, Japan's carrier air groups were filled with poorly trained rookies flying outdated planes. In June of that year, at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, over 300 Japanese aircraft were shot down in a single day. The once feared carrier fleet was gone. By late 1944, Japan used its remaining carriers as decoys. Empty shells meant only to lure the Americans. The outcome of the war was sealed. McClusky's decision to keep searching when his fuel was nearly gone had set this spiral in motion. Admiral Nimitz later said his judgment decided the fate of the Pacific Fleet. Commander Fuchida, who survived Midway despite his injuries, would later co-author Midway, The Battle That Doomed Japan. He admitted that America's victory was total, its intelligence flawless, its pilots relentless. He wrote simply, "The battle decided the fate of Japan. Midway proved that modern wars are won not by courage alone, but by intelligence, production, and adaptability. Japan's system could not recover from loss. America's could." Those 5 minutes between 10:24 and 10:29 a.m. on June 4, 1942, decided the Pacific War. Wade McClusky returned to the Enterprise, wounded, his aircraft riddled with bullet holes, and down to his last gallons of fuel. He received the Navy Cross but claimed no heroism. "I just did my job," he said. Yet that job, following the wake of a single destroyer across an empty ocean, changed history. From that moment on, the United States held the initiative in the Pacific, and Japan fought a losing war it could never win. The 5 minutes over Midway became the hinge on which the entire Second World War turned. A reminder that sometimes history itself can change in the time it takes for a single bomb to fall.